The First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Perhaps one of the most forgotten elements of the First Amendment is the right to freedom of the press. Freedom of the press refers to our right to spread and access opinions without government regulation. This right has changed throughout American history with legislation, interest group involvement, and Supreme Court rulings. Today, America faces the potential of a new era for the media with the rise of fake news and a growing demand for online media access. Could we possibly face more regulation than ever before? Could the equal time rule return? Could the fairness doctrine become the norm? Would these regulations prove to be beneficial or detrimental? Throughout American history, the media has gone through different stages of regulation and deregulation that have affected the way the public accesses news and information. The 1934 Communications Act implemented a provision known as the Equal Time Rule. This provision required radio and television stations to treat legally qualified political candidates equally when it comes to selling or giving away airtime. In other words, broadcasters who offered a certain amount of time to one candidate were required by law to offer the same to other opposing candidates. The Fairness Doctrine began as an FCC rule in 1949. It required broadcasters to devote time discussing both sides of controversial issues. The purpose of this was for broadcasters to present both viewpoints in an honest, equitable, and balanced manner. At the time, this seemed to be the best way to avoid bias and a lack of opinion diversity. However, the Fairness Doctrine didn't survive for long. In 1987, under the Reagan administration, the FCC repealed this doctrine. This opened the doors for media to become as polarized as it pleased, hence the rise of conservative talk radio in the late 80s. One of the biggest issues regarding the freedom of the press in the United States currently is the war on fake news. Since the beginning of his 2016 presidential campaign, Donald Trump has been frequently voicing his opinion on mainstream media. The president has accused certain media networks of intentionally framing the news they report and how they report it against him, labeling them as fake news.
Because the press honestly is out of control. The level of dishonesty is out of control.
Trump's campaign against fake news has grown increasingly aggressive, evident by his tweets on the matter. In a tweet from February of 2017, Trump calls out news outlets such as CNN and the New York Times, declaring them not only fake news, but also as an enemy to the American people. And this kind of language is usually reserved for hostile foreign governments or corrupt organizations. Similarly, companies that report negative stories about the president have had their broadcasting licenses threatened, and many more have been directly called out as liars.
The underlying core of the First Amendment is that it is not for presidents to decide what the news is. That is for an independent press and an independent public.
This treatment of the press creates a very hostile climate, which journalists are constantly in fear of lawsuits or even imprisonment. Many people have the viewpoint that our press freedom should in fact be regulated by our government or by a third party, such as the FCC. The reasoning behind this viewpoint is that some people believe that this would completely prevent verbal harm and abuse from being exhibited in everyday life. Keep in mind, a majority of harassment happens through the media and social outlets. If all of this media was in fact regulated, then the harassment has a chance of being prevented. This goes to the question of whether endangering our right to free press is worth the chance of stopping harmful or offensive content from being published. Many people believe the answer is yes, and many believe it's no. The importance of a free press seems to often be taken for granted in the United States. However, it is ideal to maintaining our basic liberties. Freedom of the press was put into the U.S. Constitution to avoid becoming a nation of censorship.
At its core, journalism's function is to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. When you're going up against powerful interests, they often corrupt government wherever they touch, and it's up to journalists to expose those connections, expose that corruption.
Why did the framers place such importance on this topic, and why would censorship be such a bad thing? Take North Korea, for example. North Korea is one of the world's most censored countries. This dictatorship essentially brainwashes its people to believe that North Korea is good and its enemies, including the United States, are bad. The government-controlled media portrays all news as positive. The communist regimes keeps all radio, television, internet, and newspaper under tight control, manipulating an unknowing public. This control and manipulation of the press is exactly the kind of corruption the founders intended to prevent with the First Amendment.
A free and open press is the salvation of our democratic republic.
Most Americans do not realize how different their lives could be without a free press. It is essential for a democratic nation like the United States to allow for free flow of ideas and information in order to educate the public. It's important that we, as the Americans of this country, have the choice to explore different news outlets and viewpoints. Restricting this right endangers liberty as we know it. One thing is certain. Our freedom of the press has a wide range of viewpoints, and unfortunately, it is very unlikely that there will ever be the implementation of a system that satisfies everybody's opinions. We, as a nation, must keep in mind the history that the freedom of the press has gone through. We have progressed immensely since the founders wrote up the constitutional amendment declaring our freedom of the press as a society, and we must always fight to maintain our freedoms granted to us.